So hello and welcome to another episode of Whit Ye Daein, the business podcast where we really talk about challenging the status quo, and we have been overwhelmed and really thankful for all of the feedback that we've had from our audience on the sessions that we've done this far, where the lovely Helena joined us and we talked about the challenges in advertising and marketing. Danny Quinn sat here from Data Vita and talked about the value and the challenges of managing our data as we grow our data sets. And then more recently, I chatted a couple of weeks ago to the amazing Joe Chidley of Beauty Kitchen and Now Reposit, who my guest today also knows. So I'm thrilled today to be joined by my, first of all, client, then colleague, and now I would say friend, Andrew Russell of Arran Sense of Scotland. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Wilma. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mr. Arran himself, as he's regularly referenced to.
There's a few that have got that one, I think.
Yeah. It's great to have you here. Now, for our audience, Andrew and I met very early days for me in starting Rise business growth, when I was approached by the then CEO to come and add some value from my global experience working in the personal care industry to a journey really that the Arran brand was going on at that time. And everything for me in business is about people. That's how we get things done. So I asked, can I come and meet some of the people that I'm going to be working with on this project? And I think you were the first person, Andrew, that I met.
I was.
And I think from the very first moment we started laughing and we were discussing memories, each of us growing up in family businesses. I think you were still in jam and I was avoiding making beef burgers, as I recall. How do you recall that?
So it's a good one. I think back on the Isle of Arran, I was probably about, I'm going to say 9 years old, and Arran Mustard had been born out of looking for something that could be sold to the tourists who visited the island. And everybody asked for something that they wanted to take home with them. And we started making the mustard in the kitchen, which was another one of those stories, on a Kenwood mixer, filling 60 jars an hour. But that's quite hard to scale when you're doing that with a teaspoon. And we then bought premises in Lamlash, converted the old dye mill, and latterly the Princess of Wales opened our third factory on that site in the 80s as well. It's interesting. I think one of the first stories I told you was as mixing jam at that tender age, and thinking about how health and safety in the world has changed. And I think if your listeners can imagine a single bed frame, like a metal single bed frame, with a sort of dustbin lid gas burner on top of it, and what must have been 100+ litres of boiling jam, and this sort of kid who did not want to be there at all, stirring this around, and you had to stir it for half an hour, not let it stick. Mm-hmm. You just heard it getting shouted at you if you let it, if you were seen to be leaning on it, and that was one of my earliest memories of manufacturing after the mustard. So
forced into doing things that we really didn't want to do. That so resonates. And I don't know what I unfortunately never met your dad, but I know with my own dad, he would try to basically bribe me.
Yes.
He came back with one of the first machines that made like handmade beef burgers, but it was the most tedious job in the world. The paper, the quarter ounce, the paper, the hand lever, and he used to convince me not to look at them as burgers, to look at them as pound notes. But of course, as you well know, money's not really my motivator, so it didn't really work. So I was trying to get into any other job apart from this tedious. So tell me about your dad.
Well, it's interesting. So at that time, my brother and I were kind of drafted is probably the right word. You didn't really get much of a choice. If you were a family business, if they needed hands, you were effectively there. Free labour. But of course, my brother and I realised that we were probably 9 or 10 again, I think, maybe a little bit after that. And we'd negotiated a day rate of £5. And I think, we were well impressed with this. We thought, we've won a watch. And my dad did agree to it pretty quickly. So we were soon to later find out. And of course, we'd done a month through our summer holidays. And as we'd gone from the kitchen to mixing and then to automation and all this sort of stuff, some of those jobs were watch the glass jars as they come through, watch the lids, make sure nothing's wrong, make sure all the quality control procedures. And of course, as at a tender age, trying to do that for hours on end was very difficult. So at the end of the first month, we thought, great, we've got £100 each coming here. And and my dad was very clever about this. When I think back on it, it didn't get paid to us, at the end of the month. We had to go and ask. And so we were saying, it's £100 each. That's what we've earned. And he said, yeah, you've done well, boys. You've earned £100 each. But of course, so here's your money. And I think he gave us something like £35 each. And of course, Duncan and I are looking at each other going, that's not right. And he said, well, after your expenses, you've both had new trainers this month. You've both been, out with your pals somewhere, and I've given you money for that. So actually, after deductions, it's £35 each. And we were like,
But quite a lesson, really.
Quite a lesson. And of course, now HMRC does the same thing to you. Sorry, guys. But it does happen. So we renegotiated the following month, and he was fine with that, and he felt we'd worked hard for it.
Yeah.
So. But
fantastic
it's stuff
story,
like
though.
that which are great.
I still am very thankful, as I'm sure you are, to have grown up in that environment, because I think it definitely shapes your work ethic. It does shape. You mentioned bottles and lids, and that attention to detail, and I can relate to that from my own parents' business. If you're going to do something, you're going to do it well,
yes,
or you're not going to. That's
absolutely, and consistently.
Exactly. So I think there are massive lessons that we've each taken in the journeys that we've since gone on. But tell me about the journey from mustard and jam to becoming Arran Aromatics, first of all.
So that was probably the late 80s, 1989, the Arran Aromatics was founded. But in the years running up to that, my parents had sold Arran Provisions to Robertson and Baxter, which is now the Edrington Group. When whisky was under massive pressures for duties, etc., they looked at diversification, I think, for the first time in their history. And their first acquisition was Arran Provisions. They were looking at starting a food division. And again, it's that my mother tells the story of, wanting to sell the company. My dad didn't want to sell the company. So they went down to the beach in front of the house where we lived in Whiting Bay. And my mum knew what my dad was like, and I was going to say chancer, but he liked a game of chance. And so she said, let's toss a coin for it. Heads we sell, tails we don't. And she won the toss. So that, again, they agreed to sell that. And they agreed to work on for a number of years, as many people do. But whisky, and that was supposed to be the first of several acquisitions, if you like, by the whisky company. But they decided after duties came back down, and they sort of lost their appetite to do that. And with that, my dad's interest started to wane. And we were, but he didn't know what to do next, really, from that. We'd worked all in from retail shops on Arran to Arran Mustard, and then becoming Arran Provisions, and going into lots of different products from jams and all that sort of stuff. And we were Christmas shopping one year. I think I was probably about 15 in Fraser's in Glasgow. And it was the year that Giorgio Beverly Hills launched. And my mother wanted some of this fragrance, as did probably every lady of the day. And I remember standing in the queue with my dad to buy some of this and watching all these people. There was a queue almost out the door. And there were guys in suits, there were guys in boiler suits, there were people dressed all different ways, all walks of life, all handing over what looked to be at least £120, if not more, to get one of these lovely blue, yellow and white striped boxes with the toiletries in it. And I remember my dad saying that he couldn't believe that. And I feel it was in that moment that Arran Aromatics and Arran Sense of Scotland was born, because he saw the opportunity with that, and felt that he could relate that back to the island. Obviously not Beverly Hills, but he could relate that back to the island. And, so that became the topic of conversation pretty much full on. And
so that was really, Giorgio Beverly Hills was really that light bulb moment for Arran
100%.
Aromatics. And it's a great example because Giorgio Beverly Hills was one of those iconic launches. To let you know, I was a 21-year-old new Estee on the Prescriptives brand as that launch happened. And I remember those queues.
Okay.
And I remember the yellow flags all the way up Buchanan Street. And I can see why your dad saw the provenance in that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a fantastic example of marketing.
Exactly.
Old school as well.
And taking some, having a little piece of something that was special. And of course, it was a very distinct fragrance in itself. So everybody knew you had a little bit of Beverly Hills.
Yes, absolutely.
And I can see the transfer of that into the beginning of Arran Aromatics. And, again, for our audience, I did an initial sort of 3 months project working with your brand, looking at where was the potential for internationalisation and all the different criteria we were working on sort of 8 or 9 years ago. And one of my it's still one of my pinch me moments of consulting. And you know what I'm going to say here was the day that I came to work with your mum.
Okay.
And we were working on range architecture, which is really how in the personal care industry we build ranges that make sense from the consumer experience, from the consumer journey point of view, but as you know, very importantly, from the profitability of the brand point of view. And we were sitting upstairs in Home Farm, looking at range architecture. And your mum was telling me the story about how she'd created After the Rain. And I was just transfixed, as a massive lover of Scotland, as a massive lover of Arran, I was just transfixed in how she was telling this story. And we carried on. And I remember the moment because we worked on a little bit longer than I think we had planned. And your mum said, ask you to go next door and get some Arran cheese and bring us some wine to finish off what we're doing. And I had one of those pinch me moments of, I'm sitting in Arran, I'm talking about something I love and which I've spent decades doing with this delightful lady, and she's just sent her son to bring some cheese and wine. And that's, it's truly one of those moments. And I've watched you develop the brand since over those 8 or 9 years. And, having come back to do some work more recently over the last couple of years, it's fantastic to see what you've achieved. You've now really, every area of the business performing well, how you've really reinvented the purpose back to what we're talking about and some of that provenance.
Yes.
So important. Tell us about some of that journey over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years, Andrew.
Okay. I suppose first it's not just me. There is a massive team
Absolutely.
of people behind it all. If I'm ever credited with it, I'm very grateful. But there's a huge team of people, many from the island, many families from the island that are part of that, and do a lot of great work and been with us many times. Our operations manager just celebrated 25 years with us. Hello, Sarah, if you're listening to this.
Hi, Sarah. And I have to mention Robin, because I love working with Robin, who's now leading product development. And he has that passion for the industry, but more importantly, he has a passion for Arran. So, hi, Robin, if you're listening. Sorry, Andrew, I interrupted.
No, not at all. So I think when you and I first met and started working together, we were rebranding from Arran Aromatics to Arran Sense of Scotland. And there was a number of reasons to do that. First, we'd been through some fairly tough challenges with the business, and as many companies do, going through family transition or just changes in the marketplace. And we started originally, it was an entirely wholesale business. Then we opened our own stores. Then we ended up closing some stores. We've grown our own website business. We have a lot of hospitality. We do export, but that ebbs and flows with challenges to it. And we felt it was time to sort of rebrand the business and update all of the packaging, green and eco. was beginning to be talked about a lot more and probably more accessible to where we were in the marketplace. And also there's things when when you're planning packaging and labeling, how long's your name and does it fit on the bottle? And Arran Aromatics was getting probably, lots of different logo shapes. And I was always the man from Arran. People that you're from the business were always from Arran. And the only place that we're called Aromatics is on the island. Everybody calls it Arran no matter where we are. So it seemed very logical to sort of go with that, and the sort of sense of Scotland piece sort of amplifying what we were doing from the island and trying to capture those senses of the place and the times and the experiences that we wanted people to share. And fragrance creation, as you touched on, with my mother is probably one of my most favourite things to be involved in. I'm a complete amateur. I know I can wave my arms, I can tell stories, show pictures, but quite often when you work with a perfumer, that's what they need. And you then go through, sometimes you nail it after 2 or 3 iterations. Quite often it can be 50 sketches to get to that. But that was what we worked on initially in doing that, and then obviously looking at where we could then take the brand from that.
Yeah, and the business has evolved, and the ranges have evolved, certainly in that time. I think particularly about something like naturals.
Yes.
It's deciding to take an approach like naturals, which is really, I see as the next generation of Arran Sense of Scotland.
Yes.
How did that come about, Andrew?
So that's a really good question, because I think after we'd rebranded, we then got ourselves some more challenges and troubles to try and overcome. That's a much longer story and probably a podcast series in it, but it's a good story, and I have been known to tell it in the pub once or twice. So, but looking at that sort of pre-COVID period, if you like, and we'd never really launched Arran Sense of Scotland properly, in inverted commas. We'd never put money behind it, not been able to. And we thought, we've missed a trick here. We didn't have the resources to do it at the time. So we were looking at whether or not we needed to create a sub-brand or do something completely from scratch, and also looking at whether Arran could be, because you use a lot of our products in the home at the moment, but could there be some that might support somebody going out and about, things like deodorant or dry shampoo and things like that. We were thinking, could we get into this space? And of course, retail was struggling, probably globally, in the main, not everywhere, but in the main. And I read an article on Lululemon's development, and they were growing at sort of 15 to 25% in their markets, and they were working a lot in athleisure, and they just launched an athleisure product range, and I thought, this is something that we could do and we could build on. We have all of the our primary asset being the island, the locations, the engagement with nature.
And it's not too far a stretch. I always worry when people are stretching brands, they stretch it so far they snap
outdoors.
It. Exactly. Yeah. It so fits with the whole provenance of the island.
So we started doing development with that, and we thought we need to up our game for green and eco. We were looking at aluminium packaging. We were looking at natural formulations. And we invested quite a lot of money in this in the year before COVID. And then, of course, COVID hit, and our sales were impacted 90%. Only the website had the lights on. And we just started working on our purpose with a lady we both know, Lindsay Boyd.
That was another synergy, wasn't it?
That was another one.
So serendipitous how we both met Lindsay Boyd. Hi, Lindsay, if you're listening.
A wonderful lady. And I remember being challenged in her classroom in London to come up with the purpose of the brand. And I'd done the first day of this. And it's a while since I'd been back in school, but everything was going great. I was answering all the questions. I thought, this is fantastic. And then we were all challenged to come up with our purpose. And Lindsay has this hot seat technique, which kind of should put the fear of God into people. And it did me. And I remember sitting there and she's like, what's your purpose of your brand? And I was like, we make people happy with fragrance. And our face dropped a million miles. And I thought, that's kind of, she's like, you've not got it. That's not deep enough. It's not high enough. It's not purposeful enough. And I did try, and she said, look, it'll just come to you one day. And probably it took 2 months for for this to come to me. And it really, what the sort of her challenge to me really unsettled and disrupted me, because I thought, I'm not, I really, a lot of things I'd taken for granted, I started to, I was questioning again. But COVID hit, and I think it was about the end of March in 2020. And we were deep in, how do we navigate this? This is the only channel on. And we started to get emails and phone calls from people, predominantly working in care in the NHS, in Ross Hall and in the local community care places, saying, look, have you got any product that we can have? Because we're working late, we're getting up really early. Your product helps us get up when we smell the fragrances and when we relax at the end, when we need to relax at the end of the day. It really helps us too. Anything you can do would be much appreciated. And we just started to get more and more of these. And suddenly then the penny drops with me that actually what were we doing? And we were really connecting people with nature. Nature has that power to influence people.
Hugely.
And I said we supply a lot into hospitality. We had all of these mini bottles, which weren't going anywhere.
Because of course hospitality is completely closed.
Hospitality was closed. So I persuaded my fellow directors there to give it all away, which was, this was a healthy 6-figure value of product. But we brought 2 people back from furlough, gave away all the product, started in Brodick, as you do. We had to start locally and eventually did the whole of Scotland, and then ran out of product somewhere near Birmingham. And we put it out into care and all the community, hospitals, all those sort of things. And we sort of said, look, our purpose is to help the world connect with nature. If you're probably needing a break at the moment. If you were going to get a break, you might stay somewhere and receive some of these products. We know you can't get a break, so here's some from us. And we felt it was the right thing to do. And I think that's quite often in business, you can be challenged a lot. What's the right thing to do, and what's the thing you need to do to survive? And they don't always overlap. And I think that probably the older I get, the more confidence I have in the two, trying to bring the two together. And that also that sort of trust out there that if you do the right thing, eventually it will come back to you in some form or another. And we didn't do it for, to grow the business or do that, but we did it because it was the right thing to do. And it was one of the things I felt at the time community there was a peak of sense of community through that, that, it's kind of drifted away again a wee bit since. Yeah. So that was a pivotal moment in the sort of discovering the purpose and doing something with it. And it had a very positive effect on the business through the rest of that year as well.
Do you know what's resonating in my head as you're describing that situation is just how all things work for good and come together? Because now that the clarity of that position of helping the world connect with nature is such a powerful, powerful message in the current times, which is so vital because, we all know we're both very familiar with how crowded our marketplace is in personal care. But that's such a powerful message. And what I want to move on to now, Andrew, is how you're going to take that message and literally take it to the world. As a Scot, there is nothing I love more than coming over the hill on the way to Ardrossan and seeing Arran. I did it a few weeks ago for the first time in a wee while. I got on the last ferry home and with my elder son and Frank and Michael and I, we watched the sunset from the last ferry home. There is nothing better. Nothing in the world can possibly stress you when you've got that kind of connection with nature. It's that powerful because it's touching all of our senses. So how do you plan as a business to use that purpose to move this family, already multi-million-pound family business, forward to a new place?
So again, a great question. I'll do my best to answer it. I think the thing with the purpose was there was to help the world connect with nature, but that also led on to, well, why? And that was because when you connect with nature, it supports your well-being, both physically and mentally. And I think coming out of the pandemic, wellbeing full stop. Perhaps more mental well-being for many of us, but challenges nonetheless. For that was to some extent going to become the second pandemic, and well-being. We all became a little bit more aware of these things, separated from friends and family, against our will. We couldn't make excuses anymore, and that was a big thing. So helping people, support their well-being. And I think that was fundamental building block of the brand. And it was interesting because, again, we had to convince all of our people that this was it. And to a word, no one, again, it was like Lindsay had said to me, when you get it right, it just kind of feels that way. And it's sort of become a bit of a guiding light for us. So we try and do everything from that point to support people's well-being. And we also, so the first part that we did with that was sort of look to collaborate and see where we could join up with other businesses to help amplify. Because when you're a small business, as size we are, we're still a small business.
Yeah.
Not on a global stage of the Estee Lauders of the world and people like that. So the first thing we did was collaborate with our hospitality clients, and we did this in COVID, and they never worked together in this way, but we got 20 of them together, encouraged people to book a room with them. It's hard to believe that people didn't want to book a hotel room. So we supported the bookings and product and all these sort of things and joined it together, and everybody loved doing that, and it achieved what we wanted: bookings and business relationships, all the sort of things improved with strength. And to me, that is, you've got to keep that organically going. Those relationships are everything. And we work hard to maintain those and try and add value. And I think that's the bit for us, is trying to do what we do well. Because one of the challenges of being a manufacturer is that you can do a lot of things, and you could be a jack of all trades and master of none.
Indeed.
And you can dilute your brand, you can dilute your business, you can never reach an efficiency. So we sort of focused on our direct-to-consumer business, our hospitality business. We're probably in around about 12,000, 13,000 rooms a night have Arran product in there. Also our sort of started our export business and some UK wholesale business who we've got some customers. I was reminded we've got a customer that's probably been with us over 30 years. So we're gonna celebrate that soon, because the business will be, let me get this right, 35 next year will be our 35th
and
anniversary.
Could you tell us who that business is?
I'm going to no, because I'm going to keep. I'll just keep it a wee bit quiet, because that's the. I should celebrate them really, but we will do. So we're going to try and do this through marketing, and I suppose that's the other bit that I learned with Giorgio, is that you've got to keep. I also met the chap who helped Joe Malone become Joe Malone, and that sort of old school marketing and
you see, one of the areas that we've not touched on yet, Andrew, and I think it's one of the things when you're as close to a business as you have been to this business, and you're talking about Lindsay sitting you in the hot seat. And I remember you calling me, actually, because I think you'd been at one session and I was going to our next session or something, and you telling me about this experience of like, I need to find this.
Yes.
And sometimes that's really, really difficult, when you are that close to a business. But one of the things I'm really championing at the moment is some of the natural resources that we have here in Scotland for our personal care industry. I'm very privileged to have worked with brands of all size and scale across this personal care industry for 30 years. And when I look at, I was very kindly invited to a round table on the day that British Beauty Council revealed their Value of Beauty report for 2022 in April of this year. And, when you see the size of beauty and personal care in a market like this, 24-ish billion, I still think we're not playing as well as we could. You agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'm just realising I didn't fully answer your question coming back into naturals. I'll join back to it in a second.
I think that's where, and this is where I'm going with this, is some of the natural resources that we've got as a country. I think we can really up our game with those resources in this important industry in this era where well-being is so important. You know, you and I joke about the lovely water, but water is, you know, a core ingredient in personal care manufacturing. 100%. And we have some of the purest and most natural waters in the world, and we have a bountiful supply of it. And with naturals, which I'll bring you back in on now, if I may, you have taken some of really the best natural resources that we as a nation and as Arran as an island has to offer, in bringing that well-being through connection to nature. Tell us a wee bit how you and Robin and the team all went about creating naturals. So
thanks for bringing me back on track, because I do digress. So I mentioned the sort of athleisure pre-COVID, and then coming out of COVID, we thought actually what we did in the product giveaway and the work afterwards sort of really reignited interest in the brand, Arran Sense of Scotland. People started to know what we were from that, and it was overtaking, you know, Arran Aromatics if you're old enough or long enough maybe, but it was Arran Sense of Scotland. And we thought, how can we take that technology that we've been researching in athleisure and put it into what was going to be a more well-being driven supportive range, because athleisure pre-COVID was what we thought was needed, and coming out of COVID it was very much how do we live our purpose and then put that at the forefront of our product development. So Robin and the guys have been doing a lot of great work on natural formulations, and there's a huge amount of smoke and mirrors in the industry on this.
Absolutely.
For sure. And it's because it's bloody hard, and it's expensive, it's unpredictable in terms of working with the ingredients. And if Robin's listening, he'll be like, I like you know. But you know, it was a real challenge, and we put together, and also what could we claim? You know, you know, again, it's this claims in any industry require a huge investment and to do that, and rightly so. So we thought, well, what can we do? And it was, how natural is the product? So we'd established that there is actually an British ISO standard for this. So we set ourselves the benchmark of working to that with 100% natural fragrance, and then where could we take the formulation to? And I think we got up to 99.9% with soap, deodorant, bath salts, things like that. But some others you can't get because some things no longer exist in nature, unfortunately. So we were in the very high 90s for every product. So we were really pleased with that, but it took 3 years to do it. And then it was how were we going to scent those products? And it was sort of calm, awaken and mindful, with the sort of three themes that we intended you could use sort of throughout the day. Awaken, be mindful, and then you want calm later on, or if you're in exams, or if you're stressed out at work and all these sort of things. But actually going, look, there's more than just scent delivering here. And scent's very powerful. Scent can take you to a place nothing else can. But then it was, you know, things like deodorant have to work. So we spent 3 years testing deodorants, wearing 2 deodorants a day under, you know, and these sort of things. But that was a huge piece for us, and is literally, to some extent, Arran 2.0, and what we've worked really hard on with our aluminium packaging, fully recyclable. We'll hopefully work with Stuart and Joe on the reposit going forward. And you know, just making sure that these products actually perform for people, and then it's about getting it into people's hands, and you know, through either influencers or having it placed in the right the right parts of the market. And even our hospitality clients now are looking to put this, or have started putting it into their
and I think that's huge, because it is all
well.
about that experience. It's that whole sensory experience, the touch as well as the smell, and how it makes you feel ultimately. I remember Robin very kindly giving me an Awaken shower gel, and foolishly leaving it in our bathroom, and our elder son coming out and said, "Mum, can we get more of that shower gel?" But it wasn't quite on the market yet. But there's nothing quite like that, because that's a next generation Arran consumer, a 20-something-year-old man who wants to take care of himself, who's now in the world of work and is wants to have that well-being. That's the target market, really.
It is. Again, we do have to one extent quite a broad reach of people, and you're After the Rain is what we're most well known for, and it has been around over 20 years now. And again, I'm very proud of that, what we've achieved with it. And that I remember the year that was launched and the packaging, and it looks quite different now.
Yes,
but it still smells the same.
Yes,
and people are very loyal to it. And again, that birth of a new scent is always great. Most recently, Kildonan.
Yes, which is amazing.
We worked on with Virgin Hotels.
Yes. So Kildonan's in Virgin Hotels?
Kildonan's in the 2 Scottish Virgin Hotels. There are only 2 in Europe. They're otherwise in the US. And they wanted a warm, soft floral which oddly enough wasn't sitting in our range architecture previously. So there's a beautiful spot on the island in Kildonan and just down by the beach, and that was the inspiration for it. And then, but you then get feedback, because when you develop something, you have a consumer in mind, and then does that consumer embrace your product or not? Where does it actually end up? And probably the most recent, actually, it launched last week, is our new men's fragrance, Sannox, which is leather, oud and amber. And we have not launched a new men's fragrance for probably 10 years. When we repackaged, we just repackaged. We didn't launch any new scents at that point. And again, this was for probably the younger, late 20s something, and of course we're all and there's plenty of people. It's always when you're the oldest person in the room, you're like,
isn't it amazing how that happens so quickly though?
Yeah, it's kind of, I do try and employ people that are older than me just to avoid that,
Exactly. It's great, but that's the key thing of, you've mentioned a few times here, Andrew, collaboration, and it is, this is something I'm really doing a lot of work in, particularly in personal care, is the different demographics. Because, you mentioned being in Fraser's age 15. I was probably in there at the same time, age 21. And we were so young and we had so much to learn. And now it's how do we share all of that knowledge and use all of that knowledge with the next generation who have grown up in a completely different world to what we grew up in, so that we can navigate ways forward for an industry like personal care. And back to our Scottish roots, to really put Scotland on the map. Because I know that's something that we've talked about a lot when we look at something like British Beauty Council's value of beauty. The value of beauty in the UK alone. I think we can punch higher as a nation if we do collaborate.
Absolutely.
You mentioned there, and Jo sat a few weeks ago exactly where you're sitting, Andrew, and what she and Stuart are doing with something like Reposit, I think really can help with some of that, putting the brand on the map. Because who doesn't want to do what's best for them?
Yes.
I.e. the wellbeing piece that we've discussed at length here, and what's best for our world, because gosh, we live in a challenging world right now.
Yes.
So I think if we are going to punch above our weight, which I know we're big ambassadors for, as are, certainly I think of people like Kevin and Jo and Stuart, and I think of people like Hans and Leon, and all of these people who really have the ability to rise their own businesses, but to rise collectively
100%
as a nation in a category which we've never needed more.
I thought you were going into the national anthem there a second.
So what does that, just to finish off, Andrew, if I may, what does that look like for Arran? What does the next 3 years look like for Arran?
So I think I just product development, innovation are key for us. I just mentioned Sannox, and my son's generation, who's 15, swiping the samples, swiping the bottles that we were testing. You go, and I didn't expect a whole raft of teenage boys to want to wear this, but they are. It's almost a black market, I think, at school. And doing it. But it's that sort of collaboration piece I come back to. I think that I look at when people perhaps many years ago, France was the epicenter of fragrance and personal care and all of these sort of things, and and to a degree, Scotland has been late to that. We are 30 odd years old. There are a few other businesses maybe of that age, but it's relatively young,
yes,
in that respect. But I feel that Scotland has a much bigger well-being message to convey with the rest of the world. We're there with whiskey.
Exactly.
Whiskey either collaborates or consolidates to achieve that end, and I think that Scotland and personal care can do that too, and that's a foundational from personal care, and fragrance lends into lots of other sort of well-being products, and the likes of what Reposit are doing in the sort of engine room of underpinning the sustainability and the green and eco of that, and I think it's, where can Scotland lead that again?
Absolutely.
And I look to, I don't always think of that first. I think of kind of, from us where we are on an island, in an island community, and how do islands become sustainable? 30 years ago, people didn't want factories on islands. And to a degree, you don't necessarily want them industrialised, but you do want them to develop and grow. And we have such fantastic tourism coming into Scotland that many people can take those things away with them, and naturally export. The consumer, to some extent, becomes the export advocate. And when you're small or smaller, I think that's really important to try and, we would like to try and harness that more. And word of mouth in today's day and age of marketing is probably still the strongest.
Yes.
They call
it's
them
just
influencers.
Yeah. It's just how we do it. And I know going back to the chat I did with Helena, and I know you've since become involved in Ernico, that empowering the consumer to really choose what they want to engage with. So many of what we've talked about today in terms of the natural resources, the excellence within formulations, the sustainability within packaging, that's a huge part of what we're seeing the consumer wants. So the consumer is becoming increasingly educated, and is able through platforms such as Ernico to access. I don't want to see anything that's got anything that's bad for me or anything that's bad for the planet. I don't want to see that stuff.
Yeah.
Never mind consider buying it.
Yeah.
So I think it's how can we continue to push those boundaries and stand, literally to shine that light, because we have as a nation a wealth of natural resources and expertise. And I think more and more we want to come together to make this, to make personal care a serious part of our, not just the UK GDP, but for Scotland as a supplier.
It can be. It was two other words I try and add to everything, and that's sort of trust and authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
Which for me are, the trust is years to build up and gone in seconds with a consumer or client or colleagues in those places. And authenticity for me, that sort of, can you scratch the surface, keep scratching the surface and find out
exactly.
Where do things
and
go
like
to.
what you find.
And like what you find.
Exactly.
That we try hard with all of that. And I think, again, that guides the decisions you make positively and negatively as well. And, the stronger you become, you're like, these are more important, right thing, right decision, and going in the right direction for it, which you always hope you're on. Because there's never that kind of obvious path, if you like, for these things.
Because you are constantly, as you were 30 years ago, you were pushing boundaries then, but you're still pushing boundaries. And that's what I love about working with you, working with your teams, and generally the opportunity that exists for our business. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. We could sit here and chat all day, couldn't we?
I've got a few stories left on the table still.
We'll maybe bring you back another time, but for today, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us once again. I hope you've really enjoyed seeing a little bit behind the curtain of Arran Sense of Scotland and the whole journey, and are excited about what's to come. Once again, I encourage you to send your feedback, send your questions. We're going to continue to bring along great guests like Andrew, who really help you to understand the opportunities for your business. So keep in touch and keep well. Thank you.